The cowboy was ready to send her back on the next train, until he saw the one thing she carried that revealed. Someone wanted her to fail. Caleb Morgan stood beside the auction yard fence as the crowd fell silent, his hand tightening around an old piece of paper. Weeks earlier, Evelyn Carter had stepped off a cold Montana train with one trunk, a marriage letter, and a hidden message meant to break her spirit. Now, the same woman stood beside his failing ranch, and nobody knew what she had truly come to build. Stay with us and discover how this story unfolds. The autumn wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains carrying the smell of pine, cold earth, and distant snow. In the small town of Bitter Creek, Montana Territory, the morning train was 12 minutes late. Nobody complained. Out here, people had learned that the railroad moved by its own rules. The whistle came when it came. The mail arrived when it arrived. And everyone waited. The platform was not crowded, but it was never truly empty when a train came through. A store owner stood near the freight office checking a list of supplies. Two ranch hands leaned against a wooden post, talking quietly. A woman from the church auxiliary watched from beneath a wool shawl, pretending she was only waiting for a friend. But when the train finally rolled into the station, every eye turned. Caleb Morgan stood at the far end of the platform with his hat pulled low over his forehead. He was not there because he enjoyed crowds. He was there because a letter had arrived 3 days earlier. A letter saying a bride would be coming. Except Caleb had never ordered a bride. He had ordered fencing wire, 40 rolls of barbed wire, cedar posts, feed supplies, things a ranch needed before winter, not a wife, not another person depending on him. The thought alone made his jaw tighten. For 5 years, Caleb had lived with the same quiet routine at Pine Hollow Ranch. Wake before sunrise, check the horses, walk the pasture, repair whatever the weather had damaged, eat supper alone after the sun disappeared behind the mountains. It was not the life most men dreamed about, but it was the life he understood. The locomotive slowed, wheels grinding against the rails. Steam rolled across the platform and disappeared into the cold morning air. Passengers began stepping down, a traveling salesman carrying a leather case, an older couple with 2 bags, a young man heading toward the mining camps. Then she appeared, a woman holding a worn leather suitcase. She stepped down carefully, her boots touching the wooden platform covered with a thin layer of dust and frost. Evelyn Carter. She was 31 years old, wearing a dark traveling dress that had clearly seen many miles, but had been carefully repaired and cleaned. Her black hair was pinned beneath a simple hat. She carried herself quietly, not looking around for approval or sympathy. Behind her, a porter pulled down a small trunk. It was old, the corners were scratched, the leather handles were faded from years of use, but it was kept neatly. Evelyn placed one hand on the trunk, as if reminding herself that this was still hers. Then she looked across the platform and found Caleb. For a moment, neither of them moved. Caleb expected to see someone nervous, someone uncertain, someone who had made a mistake. Instead, he saw a woman standing in a strange town surrounded by strangers, and somehow she looked like the only person there who knew exactly why she had come. She walked toward him. "Mr. Caleb Morgan," her voice was calm. Caleb nodded once. "Yes." She reached into her coat and removed a folded letter. "My name is Evelyn Carter." She held the letter toward him. "I believe I was sent here because of our arrangement." Caleb did not take it immediately. "What arrangement?" The smallest change crossed her face. Not anger, not embarrassment, something quieter, the expression of someone who had already endured disappointment before arriving. "The marriage arrangement," she said. The wind moved between them. For several seconds, Caleb simply stared. "I'm afraid there's been some mistake." Evelyn lowered the letter slowly. "A mistake, yes." He looked toward the train, then back at her. I never contacted any marriage agency. Behind them, a few people had started paying attention. In a small town like Bitter Creek, news traveled faster than the telegraph. Two ranch hands near the freight building exchanged looks. A man named Harold Whitmore's cousin, who owned the local feed store, leaned closer to hear better. Caleb noticed. He hated that, not because of himself, because he saw the way Evelyn stood there. A woman who had traveled hundreds of miles, only to discover she had arrived somewhere she was never expected. Perhaps the agency made an error, Caleb said. Evelyn folded the letter back along its original crease. Perhaps her answer was simple. Too simple. Most people would have demanded an explanation. She did not. That caught Caleb's attention. You came all the way from Tennessee? Yes. Alone? Yes. The answers came without hesitation. Caleb looked at the woman in front of him. He knew hardship, he knew cold nights, failed crops, injured animals, and losing things you thought you would keep forever, but he had never expected someone to walk into Bitter Creek carrying that same kind of quiet strength. Then the porter placed the trunk beside her. The movement turned the trunk slightly, and Caleb saw something attached to the handle, a small piece of paper, brown, tied with string. At first he thought it was a luggage tag. Then he saw the word written across it. Worthless. His eyes stopped. Evelyn noticed. For the first time her expression changed. She looked down. She had seen it before, maybe hours ago, maybe the entire train ride. Caleb stepped closer. Who did this? Evelyn did not answer immediately. The cold wind moved through the station. I don't know. But the way she said it told him something. She did not believe it was random. Caleb reached down and removed the tag. He folded it once and placed it inside his coat pocket. No speech, no dramatic promise. Just a quiet action. Evelyn watched him. Then she looked around the platform, at the people pretending not to stare, at the women whispering behind gloved hands, at the men who had already decided they knew her story. Then she looked back at Caleb. I assume the ranch is not far? Caleb almost asked why she was not angry. Instead, he simply picked up her trunk. It's about an hour north. They walked toward his wagon. The streets of Bitter Creek were covered with dry dirt and fallen leaves. Wooden storefronts lined the road. A blacksmith worked near an open door, sparks briefly flashing in the morning light. Nobody said anything, but everyone watched. Caleb helped her into the wagon. Evelyn sat with her hands folded over her suitcase. The ride toward Pine Hollow Ranch began in silence. The mountains grew larger with every mile. The town disappeared behind them. Only the sound of horse hooves and wagon wheels remained. Caleb glanced at her once. She was looking ahead, not frightened, not excited, simply observing. You should know something, he finally said. Evelyn turned slightly. This ranch is not easy living. I expected that. Winter comes early. I expected that too. There's no town nearby. I know. Caleb looked at her. You seem prepared for everything. A faint smile touched her face. No. She looked back toward the mountains. I'm just prepared for things not being easy. He did not have an answer for that. By late afternoon, Pine Hollow Ranch appeared between two mountain ridges. The house was small but sturdy. The barn was larger than the living quarters. The fences showed years of repairs. The land was beautiful, but tired. Caleb saw Evelyn notice everything. The broken fence post, the empty feed bin, the cattle standing farther apart than they should. He expected questions. Instead, she only carried her suitcase inside. That evening, Clara Morgan sat quietly at the dinner table, watching Evelyn with curious eyes. The 10-year-old girl had lost her parents 2 years earlier and had lived with Caleb ever since. She did not speak much around strangers, but she pushed the bowl of potatoes closer to Evelyn. A small gesture, a quiet welcome. Evelyn thanked her. Caleb watched. He noticed things, the way Evelyn never complained, the way she thanked Clara as if the child had offered her something valuable, the way she looked at the ranch. not as a place she was trapped in, but as something she was trying to understand. Later that night, after the dishes were washed, Caleb stood near the doorway of the spare room. The house was quiet. Outside, the wind moved across the empty pasture. "Mrs. Carter," she turned. "If you want to return on the next train, I'll pay for the ticket." Evelyn looked at him. "You mean that?" "Yes." He paused. "I won't hold you here because of a mistake someone else made." For a moment she said nothing, then she walked to the window. Beyond the glass was nothing but darkness, fields, and mountains. A place she had never seen before, a place where nobody knew her, a place where someone had already decided she had no value. But Evelyn had crossed too many miles to let a stranger's opinion decide where she stopped. She looked back at Caleb. "I traveled all this way because I needed a new beginning." Her voice was soft. "But I didn't come here to prove someone wrong." A pause. "I came here because I still believe I can build something." Caleb stood silently. Evelyn looked once more toward the dark fields outside. "I've already come too far to turn around because of a few words from people who don't know me." The fire in the room cracked softly. Caleb lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, the quiet inside Pine Hollow Ranch felt different. Not warmer, not yet, just different. And neither of them knew that the woman who had arrived carrying a suitcase and a cruel message would soon become the one person capable of saving everything Caleb had spent his life protecting. The first morning at Pine Hollow Ranch began before sunrise. It always did. Caleb woke to the sound of the old wooden house settling against the cold wind. The stove had gone nearly dark during the night, and the first thing he did was place another piece of split pine into the fire. When he stepped into the kitchen, he found Evelyn already awake. She stood near the window with a cup of coffee in her hands, not drinking it, watching the ranch. The pasture stretched beyond the glass, covered in pale frost. The fences disappeared into the gray morning light. The cattle moved slowly near the far end of the field, searching for grass beneath the frozen ground. "You've been up long?" Caleb asked. Evelyn turned. "Long enough." He looked at the coffee pot. "You found everything?" "Yes." There was no complaint in her voice. That surprised him. Most people who came to Pine Hollow noticed what was missing first: the small kitchen, the cracked floorboards, the old furniture, the weak fence line. Evelyn seemed to notice those things too, but she also noticed what remained. After breakfast, Caleb showed her the ranch. The barn had 3 stalls that needed repairs. The north fence had been patched twice and was beginning to fail again. The water trough near the east pasture leaked slowly, wasting more than they could afford. "This place has seen better years," Samuel Brooks said from behind them. The older ranch hand leaned against the barn door, his weathered face unreadable. He had worked for Caleb for 15 years. He trusted the land. He trusted horses. He trusted hard work. People were more complicated. "Mrs. Carter," Samuel said, tipping his hat slightly. "Mr. Brooks." His eyes moved toward the pasture. "You know anything about cattle?" Evelyn looked out at the herd. "My father raised them." Samuel nodded slowly. "Everyone says they know cattle until winter proves they don't." Caleb expected Evelyn to take offense. She didn't. She simply walked toward the fence. For several minutes she stood there, watching, not speaking. Then she pointed toward a smaller brown calf near the edge of the herd. "That one isn't eating enough," Samuel frowned. "He eats, yes," Evelyn looked back at him, "but the others push him away before he gets enough." Samuel glanced toward Caleb. Caleb said nothing, because he had noticed the calf losing weight. He just hadn't found the reason. Later that afternoon, Evelyn asked for a piece of paper and a pencil. That evening, Caleb found her sitting at the kitchen table. The same table with one uneven leg he had meant to repair for 2 years. She had written notes, feed amounts, fence conditions, animals that needed attention. Questions. Caleb picked up the paper. You wrote all this today? Yes. He looked again. A mark beside the east pasture, a note about the water supply, a warning about the north fence, things he had been too close to see. How did you notice this? Evelyn looked down at her coffee. Sometimes you stop seeing things because they become part of your everyday life. Caleb said nothing, because he knew she was right. The next morning, the small brown calf was missing from the herd. Caleb found Evelyn in the barn. She had moved the calf into a quiet stall with fresh straw and a bucket of water. Samuel stood nearby. This is ranch work, he said. Evelyn looked up. Yes, not a place for dreams. The room went quiet. Caleb waited. He expected an argument. Instead, Evelyn gently adjusted the blanket over the calf. Land doesn't ask who takes care of it, she said. Samuel stared at her. Then he looked away. He did not apologize. Not yet, but he stayed. That evening, Caleb rode into Bitter Creek to collect supplies. At Thomas Reed's store, he found a stack of unpaid invoices waiting on the counter. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Caleb. What? Older man hesitated. Then he lowered his voice. There's something you should know. Caleb looked up. Thomas glanced toward the window. Your marriage arrangement. The room seemed to become quieter. What about it? Thomas reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded receipt. A payment record, a name. Harold Whitmore. Caleb stared at the paper. The pieces began falling into place. The strange letter, the missing fencing supplies, the woman arriving at his doorstep. Harold had not sent Evelyn because he wanted to help. He had sent her because he believed she would destroy Pine Hollow. Caleb rode home under a darkening sky. The truth sat heavy in his coat pocket. When he reached the ranch, he saw Evelyn outside. Rain had begun falling. She was repairing a section of fence alone. Her dress was wet. Her hands were covered in dirt. She looked up when she heard his horse. For a moment, Caleb almost told her everything. Almost. Then he saw the way she held the broken fence post steady against the wind. Not because anyone asked, because it needed doing. He lowered his eyes. Get inside before you catch cold. Evelyn looked at him. Is that an order? For the first time, a small smile appeared on his face. No doubt a pause. Just advice. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, and Caleb rode toward the barn knowing one thing for certain. The woman Harold Whitmore had sent to ruin him was becoming the only person who might save his ranch. But she still did not know why she had really been sent there. For the next several weeks, Pine Hollow Ranch slowly began to change. Not in ways that anyone from town would notice at first. There were no grand improvements, no new buildings, no sudden fortune. Just small things, the kind of things that mattered on a ranch. The east pasture was no longer being used every day. Evelyn had explained that the grass needed time to recover before winter arrived. Caleb had been skeptical at first. That pasture had always been used the same way because that was how his father had done it. Because that was how everyone did it. But when he rode through the field 2 weeks later and saw new growth pushing through the soil, he stopped arguing. He simply looked. Samuel noticed. You're thinking she might know what she's doing. Caleb adjusted the reins. I never said she didn't. Samuel gave a quiet laugh. No. You just spent 3 weeks acting like she might accidentally burn the whole ranch down. Caleb looked toward the hills. I was wrong. The old ranch hand studied him. Those words did not come easily from Caleb Morgan. Samuel knew that. Seems like she's not the only thing changing around here. Caleb did not answer, because he knew Samuel was right. Evelyn never tried to take control of Pine Hollow. She never walked into the ranch and acted like she had all the answers. She listened, she watched, then she worked. That was what bothered Caleb the most. He had expected demands, complaints, someone who would look at the harsh land and ask why she had been brought there. Instead, she woke before sunrise and carried water to the barn before anyone noticed. She learned the names of every horse. She remembered which cattle needed extra feed. She repaired small things without announcing she had done them. One morning, Caleb found his old saddle blanket folded neatly on the workbench. The torn section had been stitched. The repair was simple, strong. He picked it up and ran his fingers over the thread. He did not know why such a small thing stayed in his mind all day. That evening, he found Evelyn sitting on the porch with Clara. The little girl was showing her a drawing she had made of the ranch. It was not a good drawing. The barn was too tall. The horses looked more like dogs, but Evelyn studied it like it was something precious. "You made the mountains too small," Evelyn said. Clara looked at the paper. "I did? They're bigger than that." Clara smiled. "Have you seen bigger mountains?" Evelyn looked toward the Bitterroot Range. "Yes," then she paused. "But these are beautiful too." Caleb stood near the barn and watched them. For a moment he saw something he had not seen in years. A home, not just a house, a home. He quickly looked away. That kind of thought was dangerous. He had learned that. The first snow came earlier than expected. A cold wind swept down from the mountains, covering the ranch in white by morning. Caleb spent most of the day checking the fences. Evelyn insisted on helping. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her. She looked at him while tightening a loose wire. "I'm not proving anything. Then why are you out here?" She looked back at the fence. "Because it needs fixing." Caleb almost smiled. That was the most Evelyn Carter answer he had ever heard. That night, the storm arrived. The wind hit the walls of the house hard enough to shake the windows. The horses became restless. Caleb grabbed his coat. "I'm checking the barn." Evelyn stood from the table. "I'll come." "No." The answer came too quickly. She stopped. Caleb realized his tone had been sharper than he intended. He lowered his voice. "It's dangerous outside. I know. Then stay here." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Evelyn nodded. "All right." Caleb stepped outside. The snow was already covering his tracks. An hour later, he heard one of the horses calling out. Something was wrong. He grabbed a lantern and rode toward the far side of the property. Near the old storage shed, he found Evelyn. She had gone out anyway. A young horse had gotten loose from its stall and injured its leg on the frozen ground. Evelyn was beside the animal, holding the reins gently, keeping it calm. Her coat was covered in snow. Her hands were shaking from the cold, but she stayed. Caleb jumped from his horse. "What were you thinking?" Evelyn looked up. "I was thinking the horse was scared. That's not what I asked." She looked back at the animal. It needed someone. The anger left his face, because he understood. She was not careless. She was the kind of person who stayed when something needed her. Together, they led the horse back to the barn. For the next hour, they worked side by side. No arguments, no distance. Just the sound of the storm outside and the quiet rhythm of two people doing what needed to be done. When they finally finished, Caleb looked at her. "Why aren't you afraid?" Evelyn wrapped a blanket around the horse. "I am." He looked surprised. "You are?" She nodded. "I've been afraid many times." She closed the stall door carefully. "I lost my home once." Her voice became quieter. "I lost people I loved." A pause. "But I learned something." She looked at him. "Losing something does not mean you stop building." Caleb said nothing, because he knew that feeling better than he wanted to admit. The next morning, the storm passed, but the trouble in Bitter Creek was only beginning. Harold Whitmore had heard about Evelyn. He had heard about the changes at Pine Hollow, and he did not like what he heard. At the local saloon, men began talking. They said Caleb Morgan had lost his judgment. They said he was letting someone else run his ranch. They said a desperate man made desperate choices. By the end of the week, the bank received a letter questioning Pine Hollow's management. A few ranch hands in town started wondering whether staying with Caleb was wise. Samuel returned from Bitter Creek one evening, carrying something folded down inside his coat. He placed it on Caleb's table. "I found this." Caleb opened it. A letter. The handwriting was familiar. Harold Whitmore. His eyes moved across the page. "When the woman arrives, Pine Hollow will fall on its own." Caleb read the sentence twice. The room became silent. Across the table, Evelyn was writing notes about the herd. She looked up. "What is it?" Caleb folded the letter slowly. For a moment, he thought about telling her everything. About Harold, about the marriage, about the reason she had really come. But then Evelyn looked at him. Not as a victim, not as someone waiting to be rescued, as someone who had already chosen to stand beside him. Caleb placed the letter in his pocket. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight." Evelyn studied him. She knew he was hiding something, but she also knew he was not ready to say it. Outside, the wind moved across the frozen pasture, and somewhere beyond the mountains, Harold Whitmore was preparing his next move, because the woman he believed would destroy Pine Hollow was becoming the reason it might survive. The weeks before the auction passed faster than Caleb wanted. On a ranch, time never waited for anyone. There were fences to mend, animals to feed, supplies to count, and bills that seemed to grow no matter how carefully a man watched his money. But Pine Hollow was different now. Not easier, different. The cattle looked healthier. The east pasture had begun recovering. The young calf Evelyn had refused to give up on was standing stronger every morning. Even Samuel had stopped questioning every decision she made. He still did not talk much. That was Samuel, but one evening, Caleb found him replacing a worn gate hinge without being asked. "You fixing that because you want to?" Caleb asked. "Or because Evelyn told you?" Samuel looked at the hinge. "Does it matter?" Caleb almost smiled. Coming from Samuel, that was close to an answer. The auction was 3 days away. It was the most important day Pine Hollow had faced in years. If the cattle sold well, Caleb could pay the bank, repair the ranch, and finally stop living one bad winter away from losing everything. If they failed, Harold Whitmore would get exactly what he wanted: the ranch, the land, everything Caleb's family had built. On the morning before the auction, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her notebooks spread out. She had several pages filled with careful handwriting, animal weights, feed records, health notes, changes she had made. Caleb poured coffee into a chipped blue cup and watched her. "You ever stop writing?" Evelyn looked up. "Do you ever stop worrying?" The answer surprised him. Then he laughed quietly. It was not a loud laugh. Caleb Morgan had forgotten how to laugh loudly, but Evelyn noticed. She looked at him for a moment, and something about that small sound seemed to stay between them. "You should sleep tonight," she said. "So should you. I probably won't. Neither will I." For a moment, they just sat there. Two people who had spent so much of their lives carrying things alone. Neither of them said it. Neither needed to. The next morning, they rode into Bitter Creek. The town looked the same wooden buildings, the same dirt streets, the same smell of coffee drifting from the small diner beside the general store. But Caleb noticed something different. People looked at Evelyn differently. Not everyone, not yet, but enough. A few ranchers nodded when she passed. One older man removed his hat. Small gestures, but in a place like Bitter Creek, small gestures meant something. Then Caleb saw Harold Whitmore. He stood near the auction yard fence wearing a clean black coat and polished boots. Everything about him looked controlled. He smiled when he saw Caleb. "Morning." Caleb stopped. "Harold." Harold's eyes moved toward Evelyn, then back to Caleb. "You brought her." Caleb's expression hardened. "She works harder than most men I know." Harold smiled slightly. "That remains to be seen." Evelyn heard him. She did not react. She simply adjusted the papers in her hand, and continued walking. That bothered Harold more than anger would have. People who were angry could be controlled. People who stayed calm were harder. The auction yard filled by mid-morning. Buyers arrived from across Montana territory. Men with notebooks, ranch owners, traders. People who knew cattle better than they knew conversation. Caleb stood beside Pine Hollow's herd. He could feel the weight of the moment. The animals were healthy, the work was real. But he also knew reputation mattered, and Harold Whitmore had spent years building his. When Pine Hollow's cattle were finally brought forward, the buyers moved closer. They looked over the animals, they checked their condition, they asked questions. For a few moments, everything was quiet. Then Harold stepped forward. "Before anyone starts bidding," he said. The auctioneer stopped. Everyone knew Harold Whitmore. When he spoke, people listened. "I believe the buyers here deserve some information." Caleb's shoulders tightened. Harold looked toward the crowd. 6 weeks ago, this ranch was struggling. He pointed toward the cattle. Now everyone is supposed to believe everything changed overnight. A few men exchanged looks. Harold continued. "Mr. Morgan has made some unusual decisions recently." His eyes moved toward Evelyn, and some choices that deserve consideration. The crowd became quieter. Harold did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That was his skill. He made doubt sound reasonable. The person managing this ranch was not someone with years of experience in Montana cattle operations. A pause. "She arrived through a marriage agency." The words hung in the air. Caleb stepped forward. "That's enough." But Evelyn touched his arm, just once, a small movement, a reminder. "Let me." Caleb looked at her. For a second, he wanted to protect her from this, from every person watching, from every careless opinion. But then he saw the expression on her face. Not fear, not anger, decision. Evelyn stepped forward. The entire auction yard became still. She carried no anger with her, only a worn leather notebook. "I have something to say." Her voice was calm, not loud, but everyone heard. She opened the notebook. "For 6 weeks, I recorded the condition of this herd." She turned the pages. The average weight loss in 3 younger cattle was caused by competition during feeding. She looked toward the buyers. The feeding schedule was changed. Another page, the east pasture was being used beyond what the land could recover from. She lifted her eyes. The rotation was changed. The crowd listened. Not because she demanded attention, because she earned it. "These animals do not know my name." A pause. "They do not care where I came from." Her hand rested on the notebook. "They only show whether the work was done correctly." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a voice came from the edge of the crowd. "Those records are accurate." Everyone turned. Thomas Reed stepped forward. The owner of the general store held a small envelope in his hand. Caleb stared. "Thomas?" The older man looked uncomfortable, but he kept walking. "I should have spoken sooner." He looked at Evelyn, then at Caleb. "I found these documents months ago." He opened the envelope. Inside were letters, payment records, correspondence. Harold's name appeared more than once. The crowd shifted. Harold's face changed, only slightly, but Caleb saw it. Thomas spoke clearly. "These papers show that the marriage arrangement was paid for by a company connected to Mr. Whitmore." Silence. The kind of silence where even the horses seemed still. Harold stepped forward. "That proves nothing." Thomas held up another paper. "It proves you wanted a woman sent here who you believed would fail." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Harold looked around, and for the first time the confidence in his eyes disappeared. Evelyn stood beside Caleb, not behind him, beside him. The woman Harold had chosen because he thought she would break the ranch was standing in front of the entire town, and she had just become the strongest proof that he was wrong. But Harold looked back at the cattle, then at the buyers. A slow smile returned. "Documents and stories are easy," he nodded toward the herd. "Let the cattle speak." The auctioneer looked around. The crowd waited, because in the end, paper could tell a story. But cattle told the truth. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The auction yard remained quiet beneath the pale Montana sky, the kind of quiet that comes when people are waiting to see what happens next. Caleb stood beside Evelyn near the holding pen. He could hear the wind moving through the wooden fence posts. He could hear the cattle shifting their weight in the dirt. He could hear his own heartbeat. Harold Whitmore had built his reputation on making people doubt themselves. For years, he had walked into rooms knowing people would listen. But this time was different, because the cattle were standing right there. No rumor could change their condition. No speech could change what buyers saw. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "All right." He looked toward the Pine Hollow herd. "Let's begin." The first buyer stepped closer. He was an older rancher from Bozeman named Walter Price. He had spent more than 30 years buying cattle across Montana Territory. He did not care about gossip. He cared about numbers. He walked along the fence slowly. He checked the animals carefully, the weight, the condition of their coats, the way they stood. Finally, he looked at Caleb. "These cattle came through winter?" Caleb nodded. "Yes." Walter looked back at the herd. "Better than I expected." It was a simple sentence, but coming from him, it meant something. Another buyer moved closer, then another. Soon, the fence line was filled with men carrying notebooks. The same people who had been listening to Harold moments earlier were now studying the animals themselves. Evelyn stood quietly. She did not explain. She did not defend herself. She simply watched. Caleb looked at her. "You're not nervous?" She glanced at him. "I am." That surprised him. "You don't look like it." She looked back toward the cattle. "I learned a long time ago that being afraid and standing still are two different things." Caleb remembered those words because they sounded like something he needed to learn. The bidding started slowly, then it picked up. One buyer raised his number, another answered. A third joined. The sound of voices filled the yard. The same town that had whispered about Pine Hollow was now watching the value of the ranch rise in front of them. Harold stood near the edge of the crowd. At first he looked confident. Then the numbers climbed higher and higher. His expression changed, not dramatically, just enough. A man like Harold Whitmore was used to controlling the room. He was not used to watching a room move without him. The final bid came from Walter Price. The auctioneer looked around. Going once, nobody spoke. Going twice, Harold looked away. Sold. The hammer came down. The sound echoed across the yard. For Caleb, it was not just a sale. It was every cold morning, every broken fence, every night sitting alone at the kitchen table counting debts. It was proof that Pine Hollow was still alive. Samuel walked over slowly, looked at the cattle, then at Caleb. "Not bad." Caleb smiled faintly. Coming from Samuel, it was almost a celebration. Thomas Reed joined them afterward. He removed his hat. "I should have spoken sooner." Caleb shook his head. "You spoke when it mattered." Thomas looked toward Evelyn. "She changed things here." Caleb followed his eyes. "Yes," he said it without hesitation, and Evelyn heard. For a moment their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. The ride back to Pine Hollow that evening was quiet. But it was not the same silence they had shared before. That silence had been filled with distance. This one was filled with everything they had not yet said. When they reached the ranch, Clara ran outside. "Did we do it?" Caleb climbed down from the wagon. "Yes," the little girl smiled. Then she ran to Evelyn. A small thing, a simple thing. But Caleb noticed Evelyn had arrived with one trunk. Now she had someone waiting for her at the door. Later that night, after the horses were settled and the house was quiet, Caleb sat across from Evelyn at the kitchen table. The same table where she had written her first notes about the ranch. The the same place where everything had started changing. "There's something I need to ask you." Evelyn looked up. "What is it?" Caleb took a breath. The marriage arrangement. The room became still. "I know it was not what either of us expected." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "No. I also know you came here because you needed a place to start over." She waited. "But I don't want you staying because of a mistake." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she looked at him. "Caleb." Her voice was quiet. "When I first arrived here, I thought I had been sent somewhere that did not want me." She looked around the kitchen. At some point, that changed. Caleb held her gaze. "I don't know exactly when." A small smile appeared. "Maybe when Clara shared her potatoes with me." Caleb looked down, smiling slightly. "Maybe." The fire cracked softly. Outside, the Montana wind moved across the fields. A few months later, after the debts were cleared and the repairs began, Caleb took Evelyn to the front gate of Pine Hollow Ranch. The old wooden sign was still hanging there, weathered, faded. He had brought a new piece of carved wood. Evelyn looked at it. "What is that?" Caleb lifted it carefully. A new name was carved into the surface. "Morgan and Carter Ranch." She stared at it. "You changed the sign." "No." He looked at her. "We changed it." For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she touched the letters with her fingertips. A name, not borrowed, not given, earned. Caleb stood beside her. "I used to think I needed someone to help me keep this land." He paused. The mountains stood behind them, the same mountains that had watched every struggle, every storm, every new beginning. "But I was wrong." Evelyn looked at him. "What did you need?" Caleb smiled. "Someone who could make this place feel like home." She looked away for a moment, not because she wanted to hide her feelings, because some moments deserved to be held quietly. Years later, travelers passing through Bitter Creek would hear stories about Pine Hollow Ranch. They would hear about the cattle, the land, the woman who rebuilt a struggling ranch with patience and knowledge. Sometimes, young ranchers would stop by to ask questions. They would stand at the gate and look at the sign. Morgan and Carter Ranch, and Samuel Brooks, older now with silver in his beard, would tell them the same story, not the story of a man who saved a ranch, not the story of a woman who proved someone wrong, the story of two people who found something worth building together. One afternoon, a young girl visiting the ranch looked up at Samuel. "Is this the place people thought would fail?" Samuel looked across the fields. The cattle moved slowly beneath the Montana sun. The barn doors were open. Smoke rose from the chimney of the house. A place that had once been nearly lost was now full of life. Samuel smiled. "No." He looked toward the gate. "This is the place where someone they underestimated built something they could never take away." And the wind carried the words across the ranch, over the fields, past the fences, toward the mountains that had seen it all, because a person's worth was never decided by the moment they arrived. It was shown by what they built after they got there. Imagine standing on that cold Montana platform with only one suitcase, a letter in your hand, and no idea if the place waiting for you would become a home or another heartbreak. Imagine carrying the weight of other people's judgments before you even had the chance to speak. That was Evelyn's journey. But sometimes, the places we fear the most are the places where we discover who we truly are. Caleb and Evelyn's story reminds us that a second chance does not always arrive in a perfect moment. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of hardship, beside a broken fence, inside a quiet kitchen, or through someone who chooses to see our heart before our past. Real love is not built through promises alone. It is built through patience, loyalty, small acts of kindness, and the courage to stand beside someone when life becomes difficult. A person's greatest value is often hidden from those who judge too quickly, but revealed to those willing to stay and understand. If this story touched your heart, share with us in the comments. What moment in this story meant the most to you? And if you enjoy stories of love, resilience, and unexpected new beginnings, consider subscribing. There are many more heartfelt journeys, forgotten secrets, and healing moments waiting for you in the stories ahead.